In fighting games, attacks are usually categorized into three simple types: low, high, and mid. Low attacks must be blocked by crouch guarding. High attacks are blocked by stand guarding. Finally, mid attacks are flexible ones. You can block them either way. These rules are the foundations of almost every traditional 2D fighting game ever made. They're simple, intuitive, and most importantly, hard-coded. They define how offense and defense work at the most basic level. But what if these rules aren't quite as absolute as they may seem? What if there was a way to hit an opponent with a high attack even while they're standing? This technique is called the F-Shiki, and it's one of the strangest, most fascinating quirks in fighting game history. At a glance, the F-Shiki looks like an overhead attack that just should not work. Your opponent is standing, seemingly doing everything right, and yet they get hit. Why? Well, it's the result of a very specific engine-level oversight that exists in almost every 2D fighting game, not because developers wanted it, but because of how these games handle hitboxes, hurtboxes, and character states during transitions. Before delving into the mechanics, we must first find its origin. The name F-Shiki comes from a Japanese Guilty Gear player known simply as F. When translated loosely, Shiki means technique, formula, or method. So F-Shiki literally means F's technique. But interestingly enough, F wasn't the first person to discover it. The earliest known version of this technique was found by a Guilty Gear Dizzy player named Saiko. He referred to it as Saiko Soap, or Psycho Soap. The term likely comes from Dizzy's bubble-like projectiles, which visually resemble soap bubbles, and were often used to set up the technique. At the time, nobody really understood why something like this worked, only that it did. Meanwhile, over in a completely different game series, Melty Blood players independently stumbled upon the same phenomenon. They called it Kamane Chudan. Kamane refers to Kamane Serizawa, one of Melty Blood's lead developers. He would later go on to develop Under Night In-Birth, where, surprisingly, the technique would not reappear, but I'll explain that later. As for Chudan, this translates roughly to middle or mid-attack. The terminology is a bit strange. After all, a mid-attack is supposed to be an attack that can be blocked by both crouching and standing. Even in the Japanese fighting game community, there's a bit of confusion. There are many theories to suggest why this technique would be called a mid-attack, but one theory suggests that the term developed around the time of Virtua Fighter, a 3D fighting game. In these types of games, high attacks can be guarded standing up, but can be dodged while crouching. On the other hand, low attacks can only be guarded while crouching. Finally, mid-attacks can hit a crouching opponent, but it can be blocked while standing. This concept from 3D fighters seems to have established the idea that attack height indicates whether an attack can be avoided while crouching, with high attacks being the ones that can be dodged while crouching. Thus, when you hit a standing opponent with an F-Shiki, it's similar to landing a mid-attack in a 3D fighting game. It's a little weird, and it doesn't make that much sense. But the important thing to note about the F-Shiki and the Kamane Chudan is that they arose from different games and different players, and yet they encountered the same underlying bug. As time went on, F began to use this technique extensively in Guilty Gear, refining it, and most importantly, showing how practical it was in real matches. Thanks to F, the technique spread throughout the fighting game community and eventually became widely recognized under a single name, the F-Shiki. Ironically, despite the technique being named after him, almost nothing is known about F himself. I tried to research him for this video, digging through Japanese websites and old forum posts, but I found almost nothing. His name being just one letter doesn't help either. There's only one known video that clearly shows F playing, and even that match footage is rough, low resolution, and heavy lag. It's not exactly easy viewing, so I won't be using it for background footage, but I will link it in the description for anyone who wants to see it firsthand. What makes the F-Shiki so fascinating isn't just that it exists, it's why it exists. Fighting games have a long history of being broken, not in the sense that the balance is weird. I'm talking about people going into the game and exploiting bugs that would later go on to define future techniques and strategies. No matter how strict the rules seem in a game, it's still software, and sometimes, between animation frames, between standing and crouching, the rules bend just enough for something impossible to happen. When performing an F-Shiki, players are exploiting a very specific and unintuitive quirk in how blocking and movement transitions work in fighting games. Under normal circumstances, switching between standing and crouching is completely free. You can tap down, let go, and your character responds immediately. There's no delay nor commitment. But everything changes the moment you block an attack. When your character blocks a move, they enter a state known as block stun. During block stun, your character is temporarily frozen. You can't move, you can't attack, and you can't jump for a fixed number of frames determined by the move that you just blocked. However, this is the crucial part. You are allowed to change your guard direction during block stun. You can go from stand blocking to crouch blocking, or from crouch blocking to stand blocking. The input is accepted instantly. The problem is that your character's animation does not change until block stun ends. This creates a strange and exploitable situation known as guard rigidity. Visually, your character remains standing even though you're now holding down back and attempting to block low. For a brief window of time, your character is blocking low while still being considered standing, and that means something very important. During this window, your character can be hit by attacks that would normally whiff on crouching opponents. That's the core exploit behind the F-Shiki. At its most basic level, the technique can be reduced to just 2 steps. 1. A character blocks an attack while standing. 2. That character gets hit by an overhead before the block stun ends. That's really it. There's normally no need for fancy inputs or tight one-frame execution barriers. It simply relies on a precise understanding of timing and engine behavior. By using the F-Shiki, players gain access to mix-ups that would otherwise be impossible. Moves that were never designed to be unreactable overheads suddenly become legitimate threats because, technically, the defender never stopped standing. While it is possible to perform an F-Shiki against any opponent who's standing and blocking, the most common application is something known as a double overhead. Normally, when you block an aerial attack, there's a standard defensive habit that most players follow. You block the jump in high, and then the moment the attacker lands, you switch to a crouch block. The reason why is that low attacks are generally much faster than overheads. If your opponent wants to open you up after landing, odds are they're going to go low. The F-Shiki exists specifically to punish this instinct. After landing a blocked aerial, the attacker immediately jumps again and performs another aerial attack, one that can hit a standing opponent. Because the defender is attempting to crouch but hasn't actually crouched yet, the second jump in hits as an overhead, and it's completely unreactable. This technique is similar to an instant overhead, but there's an important distinction. An instant overhead is designed to hit crouching opponents every time. An F-Shiki, on the other hand, only works if the opponent was standing and tried to switch low. In many games, the attacker doesn't even need to land on the ground to perform an F-Shiki. In Guilty Gear Strive and other anime fighters, characters often have double jumps. After a blocked aerial, the attacker can immediately double jump into a second aerial attack. Normally, this would be pointless. You get no combo, no pressure, and no reward. But if you have at least 50 meter, you can Roman cancel the overhead hit and convert it into a full combo. This is one of the reasons the F-Shiki is such a dangerous round-ending tool. You may also hear the F-Shiki referred to as a fuzzy overhead, which is a bit of a misleading term. The word fuzzy refers to situations where a character seemingly performs 2 actions at once. For example, it is possible for a player to quickly switch between crouch blocking and stand blocking to defend against a high-low mix-up. By switching between the 2 states at a precise timing, the defender can defend against both the high and the low, creating a fuzzy scenario where it seems like they are blocking both ways. In the case of the fuzzy overhead, it refers to the way that the defender is forced into blocking 2 conflicting states at once. That said, not every game allows an F-Shiki to function freely. As mentioned before, Under Night In-Birth has a specific safeguard against this exploit. Aerial attacks performed while rising are treated as mid-attacks rather than highs. However, that doesn't mean double overheads are impossible. Carmine, for instance, has access to a mix-up that, while not being a true F-Shiki, resembles the concept. He can cancel the first hit of his jump C to a jump A. The jump A will still hit any opponent who tries to switch low after blocking the initial attack. So even when developers try to design around the bug, the players still find ways to recreate the threat. Now from the defender's perspective, the answer to the F-Shiki might seem obvious. Just keep blocking high, right? Wrong. The attacker is never obligated to use the F-Shiki. They can just as easily land and go for a fast low instead. and that's where the real mind game begins. The safest way to avoid an F-Shiki is to block the first hit low, but most setups are specifically designed to force the defender to block high initially. Even if you recognize the situation, even if you know the setup is coming, you're still facing a true 50-50. Is your opponent going to commit to the F-Shiki, or are they going to bait you and go for a low? Sometimes the F-Shiki isn't even used as a consistent mix-up, it's saved as a surprise option, pulled out only once to close out a round. Despite how powerful it is, the F-Shiki usually doesn't lead to massive damage on its own. That's because the combo starter is often a light attack which has heavier damage scaling. In simple terms, starting a combo with a weaker move leads to weaker overall damage unless you spend meter on a super. Still, the ability to open up an opponent with a sudden unseeable overhead is an incredibly powerful tool. In the right hands, it can decide entire matches. At the end of the day, the F-Shiki isn't just a clever trick or a piece of obscure tech. It's a window into how fighting games actually work beneath the surface. On paper, the rules of blocking are simple. High attacks beat crouching, low attacks beat standing, and mid attacks can be blocked by both standing and crouching. These are the fundamentals every player learns on day one, and they form the backbone of the genre's offense and defense. But the F-Shiki reminds us that those rules often have loopholes. Sometimes the code disagrees with itself. The F-Shiki exists because fighting games must reconcile player input, animation states, and hit detection across tiny slices of time, measured in frames. During that reconciliation, there's a brief moment where the game allows a character to be in two contradictory states at once, blocking low while still standing, and that contradiction is all it takes. What started as an unnoticed quirk became a weapon, not because developers designed it that way, but because players were curious enough to test the limits of the system. What's especially interesting is how universal this phenomenon is. The F-Shiki wasn't born in one game, with one player under one set of rules. It appeared independently in Guilty Gear, Melty Blood, and later in countless other fighters. Different engines, different developers, but all the same exploit. That tells us something important. This isn't a mistake tied to a single game. It's a structural consequence of how most 2D fighting games are built, and every time developers try to remove it, such as by reclassifying aerials, players find new ways to recreate the same idea. The shape changes, but the concept survives. There's also something poetic about the name itself. We know almost nothing about the player called F. No interviews, no detailed match archives, barely even a clear video, and yet his name is permanently etched in fighting game terminology. Not because he won a championship, and not because he was the best player in the world, but because he wanted to push the game in a new direction. He took a strange interaction that most players would dismiss as a glitch and turned it into a repeatable, teachable, and competitive strategy. In doing so, he helped redefine what was possible within the system. And that's really what the F-Shiki represents. It's not about hitting someone with a sneaky overhead. It's about pushing the boundaries, no matter how small it may seem. It's about taking the resources given to us as players and thinking outside the box. In fighting games, the strongest tools aren't always the ones the developers intended. They're often the ones discovered by players willing to ask, what happens if I do this?